Welcome back, you wonderful people, to Connor Reads. Today is going to be part 3 of Robert Jordan's A Crown of Swords. And if you haven't read this book, there's going to be spoilers from the outset and throughout. So pause, go read the book and come back. If you have, and I would guess most of you have, let's hop into it. So I've read from chapters 13 through to 21. At the start of chapter 13, we get a map of Abu Dar, which is a clear indication that we're going to be setting up the main bulk of the story here. And this section was really fun to read. Now, we did hop a lot of perspectives, so we went through like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different perspectives during this period of time, and we rarely got more than 1 or 2 chapters, sometimes just a few paragraphs from each perspective. So the first perspective we join is our 4 ladies. So we have Nynaeve, we have Elaine, we have Bridget, and then we also have Avinda. And we join them on the decks of the Sea Folk, who have essentially created like a blockade almost around Abu Dar and all of its waterways and ports. From a meeting with the boat mistress, I believe it is, and also Wavefinder, we discover that what they're looking for is called the Bowl of Winds, and it actually means a lot to the Sea Folk, which makes sense because it's going to be really important to everyone because of the Dark One's influence on the weather. It's really drying things up. However, it seems like this bowl is something that's been lost to the Sea Folk for over 2,000 years. And on a regular day when the weather is normal, I believe the Sea Folk probably have more claim to it due to the fact that nearly all of them who can channel are much more focused around weather channeling because it makes such a big difference to them because they live on the seas and they live and die by the wind. Now we leave them negotiating essentially a deal as to what's going to happen when they find this bowl, I assume. So my prediction based on this, we don't get a ton of information to go by. Obviously I predict that the Sea Folk decide to help, but I believe that once we found that Bowl of Winds, and we will find it, and we fight off who we need to, and we fix the weather, I think the Sea Folk are going to keep the bowl. I just think it's much more important to them. I also predicted that the Sean-Chan are going to attack Abu Dar via the seas, of course. They have to come from there. And I think the Sea Folk's gratefulness for getting the Bowl of Winds back, because it sounds like it might have come from them, will be they will help repel that attack. The next perspective we join is Matt's, and he's down at the race course. And I just have to say again for the 100th time that Matt's perspective is by far the most fun to read. It's just the most relatable. He just has thoughts similar to, you know, how I believe I would think. Like, he's still trying to have a good time during the midst of all this, and still, although he does obviously take it seriously, like he understands the seriousness of the situation, it's life or death for the entire world, but he's still trying to have a good time, and I have so much time for that. Now at the race course, he's utilizing some of his famous luck, and he notices a woman who tried to assassinate him much earlier in the series. So he decides to follow her, and he does pretty successfully, to the house of a White Cloak, and it's the White Cloak who is known as Bors. Outside of the White Cloak's house, he bumps into an old man that he also noticed at the racetrack as well. And later information comes to light that this old man's name is Old Cully. Now with Old Cully, I predict that this is somebody important who's been reborn for a couple of reasons. Number one, Matt feels like he almost recognizes him. The other person he feels like this with is Bridget, who is obviously someone who is reborn. So logically, this old guy is reborn as well. The second reason is we do get a paragraph or 2 from Old Cully's perspective, and he's trying to follow someone, and he's having some trouble with his memory as well, which I would assume is something that happens to people who are reborn. They must get to a point where they start to remember some of their old lives, and they're struggling to remember everything, and he seems like maybe he's at this point. Now when it comes down to who he is that's been reborn, that's a tough one. Some of the men that I know that he may have been reborn from, I believe are just too much of a badass, if that makes sense, in their previous life, for them to be someone called Old Cully, who we just meet in the 7th book. So those people would be like Arthur Hawkwing, or someone like Aemon, the King of Maniferan, and yeah, those are the type of ones that come to mind. We don't know too many other badass men, unless I've completely forgotten them. So yes, I predict that Old Cully is somebody who's reborn, and I'm excited to learn more about his story. Next up, Samael. He visits Bors and the Lady Assassin, and essentially he charges them with finding the Bowl of Winds. As normal, Samael strikes fear into everybody. However, there is one thing that pops up. We get the perspective from Bors, and he is thinking about the person who was in charge of the Lady Assassin, and if I remember correctly, he said he was frightened of that person as well. So I am interested to know who she reported to immediately. Next we move on to Matt. He makes his way back from his solo mission and is determined to spend some time with the girls who've been avoiding him. So he's trying to make his way there, and what happens is he bumps into several groups of Aes Sedai. They both try to take control of him essentially, and they're having like a grabbing match in the corridor, and he says one thing that makes me laugh. He says it appears like these two groups of Aes Sedai are trying to Out-Aes Sedai each other, and I just found that absolutely hilarious because it was exactly what was happening in the scene. They were both trying to use haughtiness and trying to use stubbornness and some kind of backwards logic to take control of Matt and be able to take him away from the scene. Trying to put each other back on technicalities with serene faces when really anger boiled up underneath, and Out-Aes Sedai each other is the perfect term. Matt is saved by the Queen. She summons him. He goes and meets her, and she ends up kind of sticking it on him. She puts on some Queen moves, but she's interrupted by her son coming in, and her son kind of forces Matt to be his friend, and it looks like they're off to the ball together as well. Now this is really exciting. I really am looking forward to this ball scene and all the trouble these two young men get into. It's all set up to remind me of a scene like the series The Lies of Locke Lamora. You know, two young men of social status and actual technical abilities gallivanting at a ball. What could go wrong? So for my prediction, I predict everything. I feel like he is going to be challenged to a duel. That has been, you know, foreshadowed a lot. And I also believe that we are going to get a ton of our main characters at this ball, and maybe it's even going to be key to finding the Bowl of Winds. Next up, we get some of the Black Ajah. Now it seems like these are taking people, maybe wilders who can channel, and they're torturing them to try and find the Bowl of Winds. Although they don't know it's the Bowl of Winds, they think it's just a room and a store of Angreal, San Angreal, and Terangreal. Now two of them have a conversation. It's clear that they've been charged by Morgidian a long time ago to find this store of Angreal, San Angreal, and Terangreal, but they haven't heard from her in a long time. And we know why, but they don't. So they decide that instead of doing that, what they're going to do is track down Nynaeve, and they're going to track down Elaine, and their goal is to capture them and essentially, I would guess, give them to Morgidian next time they see her. My guess is that our ladies are probably going to lead them to the San Angreal and the big store of magical artifacts. And I also think that our ladies might lose to the Black Ajah as well. I think they may be captured, and we have Lan, who's on his way in, who may save them at the last moment. And that doesn't normally happen. Normally it is the women kicking butt. So, you know, maybe a classic fantasy trope would be nice to have thrown in there. Next up, we get a new character introduced. And we only get a couple of chapters with this character, maybe even less, maybe one chapter and a couple of scenes. And I just have to say that she gave me amazing vibes, and I really like her. And the character I'm talking about is Cad Swan. And hopefully I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She visits Rand, and it's out of the blue. No one knew she would come in. And we learn pretty quickly she's one of the oldest Aes Sedai still living, if not the oldest. She's at least 270 years old, and she's a badass for a few different reasons. So one of the reasons I think this is, it becomes apparent that she turned down being the Emil in seat, she turned down being a sitter, and she also turned down being the head of an Ajah, and that just doesn't scream out typical Aes Sedai to me. What that screams out is somebody who, as is stated, loves adventure, doesn't want to be shackled down by the chains of office, and really wants to make a difference in the world. So is Robert Jordan throwing me an Aes Sedai that I can like this late in the story? Surely not. So in that first scene, she comes in and she really ruffles Rand's feathers up, but not in the way typical Aes Sedai do, by trying to lay some claim on him and being indirect and upside down. What she does is she comes in and she really just shows value. And what I mean by that is she talks to him about the voices inside of his head and the madness. And although it does put Rand on the back foot, and we love Rand, he's our main character, it is something valuable for him to think about. And maybe she would be the right kind of person to actually help guide him. We also learn something else really interesting as well. Afterwards, when she's conversing with the Aes Sedai who have sworn fealty to Rand, what she mentions is some vileness after the Aiel War. Now, she doesn't specify what that is, and none of the other Aes Sedai seem to know what she's talking about. What this means is it's probably a secret, and it's something that the Aes Sedai did after the Aiel War. Now, from what we know about Aes Sedai, I would guess that this something was pretty terrible for this woman to think it was vileness. And it seems she went into retirement And if I'm not mistaken, I might be massively wrong here because I didn't look this up just before the video. I believe the Ajah War was like 20 or 30 years ago. Yes, it must have been, because Rand was born during that on the Dragon Mount. So yeah, it was about 20 years ago or so. And that seems about the kind of time that she retired as well. So maybe that vileness forced her into retirement, and something that vile must have come from the Aes Sedai for her to get that bitter taste in her mouth. So if I were to predict what it was, that's hard. I would guess it was some kind of genocide or something that goes against what the Aes Sedai, on paper stand for. So maybe it was using magic to murder or kill or maim or change something unnatural. Next, we leap to Savannah's point of view. And I have some grudging respect for Savannah. Although I don't like her as a person, as somebody who can't channel, she has had a big influence on the story and a huge number of people. So via the traveling box, she summons Samael and Grendel in disguise. Honestly, the traveling box is kind of confusing. I read it a couple of times. I don't really know what it's all about. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to know what it's all about at this point either. But what we do know is that Savannah believes that Samael and Grendel, if she can capture Rand, are going to be able to subdue him, and then obviously her goal is to marry him, essentially, / take control of him. Samael and Grendel, I'm sure, have completely opposite ideas. Now, when it comes to my prediction, I'm going to go the opposite of logic, and I'm going to go with my gut. Savannah has done so much with, not much actual physical or magical ability. And because of that, I'm going to predict that she actually ruins Samael and Grendel's plan a little bit. I think she stabs him in the back, and I think it's at an inopportune moment, and I think it's going to cause a lot of trouble for these Forsaken. On top of this, we also have somebody called the Watcher watching this entire interaction. Now, this person mentions a few key things. They mention, number one, that they have definitely been in the Pit of Doom at some point in some capacity. So that screams out, Forsaken, pretty much just Forsaken. The other person / being that I thought it might be is the really tall Midril, whose name is Shadar Hyran, if I'm not mistaken. However, Shadar Hyran seems to know more about the Dark One and what he's thinking than any of the Forsaken does currently. So he seems to have maybe somehow a closer relationship to him. So my guess would be this person, the Watcher, is a different male Forsaken, because when he heard Samael tell Grendel that he was going to be named Bliss, he said some interesting stuff, and he essentially said, the truth of today is not the truth of yesterday, and is not the truth of tomorrow as well. And that named Bliss, the promise of being named Bliss seems to have been given out a few times by the Dark One, because he just wants them to battle with each other. And I feel like the only person who would know that is a Forsaken who'd maybe been told they were named Bliss before. So my guess is that the Watcher is a different male Forsaken. So I don't have a ton of predictions from, this section, because we really did just hop from one story to the other without any without a ton of depth. It was more just setting up the main bulk of this story, which I'm really excited to read. One thing I do want to say though is Cad Swan is someone who I'm really excited to read about as a whole. My gut says that she's not someone to be crossed lightly, and I'm sure a lot of you are deep into fantasy and you love reading it. And one series of books I read a long time ago was Christopher Paolini's Aragon books. And she strikes me as somebody a bit like Angela the Herbalist. Somebody who is like chaotic good and really doesn't adhere to the power structures. And like I said earlier, the chains of office the same way that other people would. And, I might be completely wrong because we literally got one chapter from her and she wasn't particularly portrayed as a good person there. But my gut and my instinct says she's going to be someone I really, really like. So thank you once again for joining me. I'm really excited to continue with this book. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any Wheel of Time fans who you think would like this series, send them the first video in the series. I'd love to have them involved as well. For my regular watchers, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.